an arc of pale gold Chardonnay, shimmering like liquid sunlight, cut through the rarefied air of Magnolia Hall. For a breathtaking moment, it hung suspended, a silent, crystalline weapon, before it shattered against the pristine white linen of a waitress's blouse. It bloomed instantly, a cold, spreading stain of profound humiliation. A single, unified gasp was sucked from the lungs of Boston's old guard, a sound of porcelain shock. Then, a silence fell, so deep and absolute it felt as if the grand, historic room had ceased to exist. This is the story of Miranda Shaw, a 27-year-old graduate student in architectural preservation who wore a waitress's uniform as a disguise, a young woman who had made an art form of seeing the cracks in every facade. And this is the story of Bianca Serrano, a 35-year-old socialite who had married into a fortune so vast it was practically a geological feature. She believed her husband's money was a universal solvent, capable of dissolving rules, manners, and the humanity of anyone she deemed beneath her. She had just drenched Miranda in a $200 glass of wine. She had branded her a thief. She was moments away from demanding her utter destruction. But in the blinding glare of her own self-importance, she was about to make a singular, world-shattering mistake. She was about to let Miranda's husband know what she had done. What follows is not a tale of coincidence. It is a story of structural integrity, of a hidden life, and of the methodical, quiet demolition of a dynasty, all triggered by the furious, whispered words of a woman she had dismissed as nothing more than furniture. Magnolia Hall was not merely a restaurant, it was an institution. Housed within the venerable walls of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, it was a bastion of quiet power and inherited grace. Its soaring Palladian windows overlooked Copley Square, its tables spaced far enough apart for conversations about mergers and inheritances to remain private. The clientele did not come here to be noticed. They came here to be recognized by their peers, to exist in a bubble of effortless, understated supremacy. Miranda Shaw moved through this world like a phantom, her presence perfectly calibrated to its primary directive, invisibility. For 3 years, she had led a carefully bifurcated existence. By day, she was a student at MIT's prestigious program for historic preservation, poring over blueprints of Gilded Age mansions and analyzing the chemical composition of 19th-century mortar. By night and on weekends, she was just Miranda, her name tag a simple, elegant script on her starched uniform. She had chosen this life with fierce intentionality. She was married to Gabriel Shaw, a name that carried a quiet, immense weight in the worlds of philanthropy and ethical technology. But in this room, she was anonymous. She had politely but firmly declined access to the Shaw family fortune, a trust that could have funded a small nation. She needed to prove, primarily to herself, that the foundation of her own life was sound, built by her own 2 hands and financed by her own aching feet. Her small, sun-filled apartment in the South End, her staggering tuition bills, the well-worn but sturdy shoes hidden beneath her uniform trousers, they were hers, earned through the relentless, graceful choreography of high-end service. Her academic specialization was structural analysis. She had a rare, almost intuitive gift for seeing how things were put together, for identifying the load-bearing walls and the hidden stress fractures in a building. She could look at a century-old brownstone and see not just its beauty, but its history of subsidence, the subtle bowing of a floor joist, the hairline crack in a plaster ceiling that spoke of a deeper, foundational problem. In the restaurant, this translated into an uncanny ability to read people. She saw the way a powerful CEO's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass and knew he was concealing a deep anxiety. She noticed the almost imperceptible flinch in a society wife's eyes when her husband spoke and understood the brittle reality of their public marriage. She was a ghost who saw the ghosts in others, a silent diagnostician of the human condition. This quiet, structural observation was her skill and her secret. Today, the sanctuary was about to be desecrated. "Reservation for Serrano," Carl Benson, the restaurant's manager, murmured, his voice tight with a familiar mix of avarice and dread. "Miranda, she's in your section. For God's sake, be perfect." Carl was a man whose spine seemed to be made of gelatin, firm enough in its normal state, but liable to dissolve completely under the heat of a sufficiently wealthy patron. Bianca Serrano was the antithesis of Magnolia Hall's understated elegance. She was new money, loud and glittering, married to a real estate magnate who had built his empire on razing historic buildings, a fact that was a private, bitter irony for Miranda. Bianca didn't enter a room. She occupied it, her presence an assault of expensive perfume and ostentatious jewelry. She treated the staff not as people, but as extensions of the furniture, to be used, ignored, or replaced, as her mood dictated. She arrived like a tropical storm, flanked by two other women who were pale imitations of her lacquered glamour. Bianca was a vision of calculated opulence in an emerald green silk dress that clung to her surgically enhanced figure. Around her neck was a breathtaking cascade of diamonds and emeralds, a piece so large and brilliant it seemed to suck the light out of the room. Miranda approached the table, her professional calm a carefully constructed shield. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Serrano. Welcome to Magnolia Hall." Bianca didn't look at her. She was busy taking a selfie, her lips pursed into a caricature of a smile. "A bottle of the Montrachet," she said to the air. "And make sure it's properly chilled. The last time I was here, it was practically lukewarm." "Of course, Mrs. Serrano," Miranda replied, her voice a placid sea. The lunch was a 2-hour masterclass in casual cruelty. Bianca complained that the natural light, the very feature for which the restaurant was famed, was giving her a headache. She sent back her lobster salad, claiming the texture was pedestrian. She spoke to Miranda only in commands, never once making eye contact, her tone dripping with the bored condescension of a queen addressing a stable hand. Through it all, Miranda maintained her serene composure. "Yes, Mrs. Serrano. My apologies, Mrs. Serrano. Right away, Mrs. Serrano." Her mind, however, was cataloguing the details. The way Bianca's hand, laden with rings, constantly strayed to the emerald necklace, a gesture not of admiration, but of anxious possession. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes, which were hard and watchful. Bianca Serrano wasn't a grand dame. She was a poorly constructed building, all gleaming facade with a foundation riddled with the cracks of deep insecurity. The performance reached its climax as they were finishing their coffee. Bianca was regaling her friends with a story about firing her personal shopper. She had the audacity to suggest a vintage piece. Can you imagine? Me in something someone else has worn? I told her, "My dear, my husband doesn't buy history. He demolishes it to make way for the future." I had her escorted out, of course. Her friends tittered with the sycophantic laughter of those who live on reflected glory. Pleased with her own wit, Bianca leaned back, gesturing expansively. Her hand caught the edge of her silk shawl, which was draped over the back of her chair. Then her face changed. The smug satisfaction evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. Her manicured hands flew to her neck, fluttering against her skin like frantic birds. The air around the table grew cold. "My necklace," she whispered, the words a raw, guttural sound. The laughter of her friends died in their throats. "Bianca, what is it?" one of them asked, her voice hushed. "My necklace!" she shrieked, shoving her chair back with such violence that it scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor. The entire restaurant, a room full of Boston's most influential figures, fell silent. Every eye turned to Table 7. She frantically patted her dress, her lap, the chair beneath her. "It's gone. The serpent's kiss. It's gone." Carl Benson materialized at the table in a heartbeat, his face a pale mask of terror. "Mrs. Serrano, please, I'm sure it's simply fallen. Let us look." "It didn't fall," Bianca snarled, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal, searching for a target, for someone to blame. She glared at the busboy clearing a nearby table, at her own friends, and then her gaze, hot and venomous, landed on Miranda, who was standing frozen by a service station, polishing a wine glass. Her eyes narrowed into predatory slits. "You." Miranda's heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm against her ribs. "Mom?" Bianca stalked toward her, her high heels clicking like gunshots in the silent room. You were just here, clearing the plates. You leaned right over me. Your sleeve brushed my shoulder." "Mom, I don't understand," Miranda stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "The necklace," Bianca hissed, her voice a low, vicious threat. "The serpent's kiss. My husband paid over $2 million for it. Where is it, you little thief?" I didn't. I would never," Miranda whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You," Bianca spat, jabbing a finger tipped with a blood-red nail inches from Miranda's face. "You people are all the same, smiling and scraping and waiting for your chance. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think you could just palm a masterpiece and walk out of here?" "Mr. Benson," Miranda pleaded, her eyes darting to her manager, begging for intervention, for sanity. Carl looked from the incandescent fury of the billionaire's wife to the terrified face of his employee. He saw a woman who could have him fired before he could draw his next breath, and a waitress who, in the grand calculus of his career, was utterly expendable. He made the coward's choice. "Miss Shaw," Carl said, his voice cold and formal, a public disavowal. "The easiest way to resolve this is for you to simply show Mrs. Serrano that you have nothing. Please, empty your apron pockets." A wave of heat, a sickening combination of shame and rage, washed over Miranda. The entire room was watching. She could see the faint glint of phone screens being discreetly angled in her direction. To be accused was a violation. To be publicly searched was an annihilation of her dignity. "No," she whispered, the word fragile but unyielding. "I am not a thief. I will not be searched." "You see," Bianca bellowed, her face contorting in a mask of vindicated fury. "She refuses. She has it. You conniving little slum rat." And then Bianca did something that transcended mere accusation. It was an act of pure, theatrical degradation. She snatched her half-full glass of Chardonnay from the table. With a snarl of utter contempt, she flung the contents directly at Miranda. The cold liquid struck Miranda's chest with a shocking impact, drenching the front of her white blouse and apron. The pale gold wine soaked through instantly, clinging to her skin, cold and sticky and smelling of oak and humiliation. The room let out that single, horrified gasp. Time seemed to freeze. Miranda stood there, dripping, the wine running in rivulets down to the waistband of her trousers. The scent of expensive wine, a smell she normally associated with quiet celebration, was now the stench of her public disgrace. Tears, hot and immediate, sprang to her eyes, blurring the sea of silent, staring faces. You can't do that," she whispered, her voice choked with disbelief. I can do whatever I want, Bianca screamed, high on the drug of her own power. You think this is bad? Wait until the police get here. I am pressing charges for grand larceny. I will see you in a prison cell tonight. Benson, call the police. Tell them your waitress just stole a $2 million necklace right off my neck. Yes, Mrs. Serrano. At once, Carl stammered, fumbling for his phone, his hands shaking. Miranda felt the world collapsing. It was her word, the word of a wine-stained waitress against the word of Bianca Serrano. No one would believe her. Her carefully constructed life, her academic career, her future, it was all about to be incinerated in the fire of this woman's tantrum. Fired, arrested, a criminal record. The 3 years of struggle, the quiet pride, the fierce independence, all of it turning to ash. The tears streamed down her face. She was small. She was invisible. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. But as she looked at Bianca's triumphant, sneering face, something inside her shifted. It was not courage, not yet. It was the cold, clear analysis of a structural engineer realizing that the entire building was about to come down on top of her. The foundation of her independent life was failing. She had to reach for a stronger support. The daughter-in-law of the Shaw family was not raised to crumble. She was raised to observe, to endure, and when necessary, to call in reinforcements. No. The thought was a steel beam slamming into place in her spine. She does not get to win. She straightened her back, the movement small but significant. She didn't wipe away the tears. She let them be evidence of the assault. Her voice, when she spoke, was trembling, but it carried across the silent room with a strange, new authority. Wait. Carl paused his dialing, his thumb hovering over the screen. Bianca scoffed. What now? Ready to confess? Give it back, and I'll merely have you fired and ensure you never work in this city again. Miranda took a deep, shuddering breath. Before you call the police, she said, her gaze fixed on Carl, I am entitled to make one phone call. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the request left even Bianca momentarily speechless. Then she let out a short, ugly bark of laughter. One phone call. Oh, this is rich. This isn't a movie, you stupid girl. You're a thief who got caught. You can make your call from the precinct to whatever low-life boyfriend you have who can't afford your bail. Please, Miranda said, turning her gaze back to Carl Benson. The hysteria had vanished from her voice, replaced by an unnerving calm. Let me make one call. It's all I ask. Carl hesitated. The optics were already a disaster. A crying waitress, drenched in wine, being screamed at by a wealthy patron. It was a viral nightmare in the making. A single phone call seemed a small, reasonable concession. It might even make the restaurant look compassionate. Bianca waved a dismissive hand, magnanimous in her victory. Fine. Let her. Let her call her mummy and daddy to tell them their precious daughter is a common criminal. Let her say goodbye to her pathetic life. You have 2 minutes. She crossed her arms, a smug, satisfied smirk plastered on her face. She was savoring this, the absolute public subjugation of this girl. Miranda nodded, her eyes downcast. She reached into her wine-soaked apron pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers, slick with Chardonnay, trembled as she unlocked the screen. The only sound in the vast, silent room was the distant clatter of pans from the kitchen and the soft tapping of her thumb on the glass. She went to her favorites. The first entry was a simple name. Gabriel. She pressed the call button and raised the phone to her ear. Her other hand rested on her stomach, feeling the cold, damp fabric clinging to her skin. Who is she calling? A woman at a nearby table whispered loudly. Her public defender, probably. Her companion snickered. Miranda closed her eyes, shutting out the world, focusing only on the ringing in her ear. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, he answered. His voice was warm, familiar, and instantly concerned. Mira, is everything okay? You never call me during your shift. Gabe, she whispered, and to her profound shame, her voice broke. The carefully constructed dam of her composure shattered, and a sob tore from her throat. The humiliation, the fear, the cold shock of the assault, it all came pouring out. There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line. The warmth in his voice was instantly replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. Miranda, what happened? Where are you? I'm at work, she managed to say. Magnolia Hall. Okay, he said, his voice a rock of calm in her storm. I hear something in your voice. Talk to me. A guest, she continued, her voice dropping. She's accusing me of stealing her necklace. Did you? The question wasn't an accusation. It was a request for data, calm and pragmatic. No, Gabe, of course not. Never. I know, he said. And the simple, absolute certainty in those two words was like a hand on her back, holding her up. Tell me the rest. She threw wine on me. A profound, terrifying silence descended on the other end of the line. Miranda could picture him perfectly, sitting in his minimalist office overlooking the Charles River, his hand lightly frozen over his keyboard. His expression, usually so thoughtful and calm, would be hardening into something she had seen only once or twice before. A cold, still anger that was far more frightening than any shouting. What? The voice was no longer her husband's. It was the voice of a man whose quiet, unassuming demeanor masked a formidable and deeply protective nature. In front of the whole restaurant. She called me a thief. Her name is Bianca Serrano. Her husband is the real estate developer. She's having the manager call the police right now. Another beat of silence. Bianca Serrano, Gabriel repeated, the name spoken as if he were committing it to memory for a very specific purpose. Wife of Marcus Serrano. Yes, Miranda whispered. She's laughing at me. She told me to call my pathetic family. Bianca, hearing the quiet, choked conversation, was growing bored with her game. Time's up, sweetheart. The police are on their way. Your phone call isn't going to save you now. Miranda looked at her, the phone still pressed to her ear. Gabriel's voice came through, no longer quiet, but sharp, decisive and commanding. Miranda, listen to me. I need you to do exactly as I say. Is she close to you? Yes. Good. Put your phone on speaker and hold it out to her. Gabe, no, I can't. Trust me, Mira. Do it now. Then I want you to step back and not say another word. Her hand was shaking so violently, she almost dropped the phone. This was it. The end of her experiment in anonymity. The end of Miranda the waitress. She looked at Bianca Serrano's smug, hateful face, and a cold resolve washed over her. She pressed the speaker button. The small icon glowed green. Then she held the phone out. What's this? Bianca sneered. Your boyfriend wants to beg for you? Save your breath. He wants to speak to you, Miranda whispered. With a theatrical roll of her eyes, Bianca snatched the phone from Miranda's hand. She held it up to her mouth, as if it were a piece of garbage. Yeah, who is this? Look, buddy, I don't know who you are, but your little girlfriend is a thief, and she's about to... A voice emanated from the phone's speaker. It was not loud. It was not aggressive, but it carried a quiet, resonant authority that seemed to alter the very acoustics of the room, It was the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to, a voice that didn't need to be raised to command a boardroom or silence a debate. "My name is Gabriel Shaw. You are speaking about my wife." The name fell into the silent restaurant, not like a thunderclap, but like a sudden, shocking change in barometric pressure. To most of the diners, the name Shaw was synonymous with the Shaw Center for Ethical Innovation at Harvard, a name attached to hospitals and museums. It was old Boston, quiet philanthropy, immense, almost invisible influence. But to Bianca Serrano, a woman desperate to claw her way into the city's inner circle, a woman whose husband's entire business depended on securing loans and permits from boards where the Shaw family's influence was legendary, the name was the sound of a guillotine blade being released. Her face. Miranda would never forget the look on Bianca Serrano's face. It was not a gradual realization. It was a complete, systemic, catastrophic failure. The blood drained from her features, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a garish mask on a corpse. Her eyes, moments before blazing with malicious glee, went wide with a primal, abject terror. The hand holding the phone began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. Her knees seemed to buckle, and she instinctively reached back, grabbing the table for support. She had never connected Miranda, the meek, wine-stained waitress, to Miranda Shaw, the brilliant, fiercely private wife of Gabriel Shaw, a man whose quiet disapproval could blacklist a company from every bank in the city. She had built her social standing on her husband's reputation for ruthlessness, and she had just assaulted the wife of a man whose power was infinitely deeper, older, and more absolute. Mr. Shaw, Bianca stammered into the phone, her voice a strangled, pathetic squeak. Sir, I believe there has been a truly terrible misunderstanding." The voice from the phone was calm, cold, and relentless. "There is no misunderstanding, Mrs. Serrano. You believed my wife was someone you could humiliate. You believed you could physically assault her in a public place, and that there would be no consequences. That wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a profound error in judgment." Carl Benson, who had been watching the scene unfold with a horror that was rapidly curdling into sheer panic, looked as though he might actually vomit. He knew the name Shaw. The Fairmont Copley Plaza leased its land from a trust managed by the Shaw family's holding company. Bianca was now sweating, a faint sheen of moisture breaking through her expensive foundation. "Sir, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Let me make this right. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. My necklace. I was upset." She turned to Miranda, her face a grotesque mask of pleading terror. "Miranda, I am so sorry. I was distraught. It's just a thing, an object." The voice on the phone spoke again, this time with a chilling finality. "Stay where you are, Mrs. Serrano. My car is 5 minutes away, and give the phone back to my wife." Moving like a terrified automaton, Bianca slowly, shakily, extended the phone back to Miranda. Her hand was trembling so badly that Miranda had to steady it to take the phone back. She lifted it to her ear, clicking off the speaker. "Gabe," she whispered. "Are you all right, Mira?" His voice was different now. The cold fury was still there, a bedrock beneath his words, but layered on top was a deep, gentle current of concern, meant only for her. I think so," she said. "Good. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I will be there in 3 minutes." The line went dead. The 3 minutes that followed were an eternity of suffocating silence. The atmosphere in Magnolia Hall had transformed from shocked observation to a kind of corporate dread. It was the heavy, expectant quiet before a hostile takeover, where everyone knew a king was about to be deposed, but no one dared to speak. Miranda stood frozen, the phone clutched in her hand. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a deep, nauseating chill in its wake. Her blouse was cold and heavy against her skin. Bianca Serrano remained by her table, a prisoner of her own making. Her two friends had subtly distanced themselves from her. Their chairs shifted a few inches away, creating a quarantine zone around her social contagion. She was frantically whispering into her own phone, presumably to her husband. Miranda could hear fragments. "Don't understand. Gabriel Shaw's wife. You have to fix this, Marcus." The grand doors of the restaurant swung open. The man who entered was not physically imposing. Gabriel Shaw was 30, with a lean, academic build, thoughtful eyes behind simple, dark-framed glasses, and a head of unruly dark hair. He was dressed in a simple tweed jacket, a button-down shirt, and dark jeans. He looked less like a titan of industry, and more like a university professor who had wandered in by mistake. But as he stepped across the threshold, the gravitational field of the room seemed to bend around him. His eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, found Miranda instantly. He ignored Bianca Serrano, who had shrunk back against her chair. He ignored Carl Benson, who was babbling an incoherent stream of apologies. He walked past them as if they were nothing more than wax figures in a museum of his wife's humiliation. He stopped directly in front of Miranda. He didn't embrace her. He wasn't a man for grand public gestures. Instead, his eyes scanned her, taking in the wine stain, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the tremor in her hands. His expression was a mask of quiet, controlled fury that was more terrifying than any shouting. He gently reached out and took the phone from her trembling hand, placing it in his own pocket. Then he took off his tweed jacket and draped it carefully over her shoulders. It was warm and smelled of old books and him. It was the most profound gesture of protection she had ever felt. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice finally breaking completely. "I had to call. I didn't know what else to do." Gabriel's hand came up to gently brush a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You have nothing to apologize for, Miranda," he said, his voice a low, resonant promise, meant only for her. "This is not on you." He let his hand drop, and then he turned. The reckoning began. He finally looked at Bianca Serrano, his expression no longer warm or academic, but as cold and hard as New England granite. "Mrs. Serrano." Bianca flinched as if he had shouted. "Mr. Shaw, sir, I can explain. My necklace, the serpent's kiss, it's a family heirloom." "It is not," Gabriel cut in, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. "It was purchased at a Christie's auction in Geneva 18 months ago. Your husband leveraged a significant portion of his commercial real estate portfolio to acquire it. It is not an heirloom. It is a liability. And now it appears to be a missing one." He took a step closer. "You were so consumed by the drama of losing your new possession that you failed to be observant." He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on Miranda. "Mira," he said gently, his voice shifting back to that of her husband. "You see things. You see how things are put together, how they fall apart." "What did you see?" Everyone turned to Miranda. She swallowed, finding her voice, the familiar cadence of structural analysis grounding her. "When she stood up," Miranda said, her voice clear and steady. She gestured with her right hand. Her shawl was draped on the chair. The clasp on that necklace is a hook and eye, not a modern lobster claw. It's a design flaw. It can snag easily. She pointed to the silk shawl, which had slid from the chair and was now pooled on the floor beside a large, expensive-looking handbag. It would have caught on the silk fringe, When she stood up so violently, the momentum would have pulled it loose. It wouldn't have made a sound falling onto the fabric. Gabriel looked at the pool of fabric on the floor, then back at Bianca. He didn't give an order. He simply waited. Face pale, hands shaking, one of Bianca's friends slowly bent down. She picked up the shawl. Nothing. Then, with a sense of dawning dread, she reached for the large, open-topped leather handbag. She peered inside. After a moment, she straightened up, her face ashen. She reached into the bag and pulled out a glittering, green and diamond serpent. The serpent's kiss. A collective sigh went through the room. The necklace hadn't been stolen. It had been misplaced, a victim of its own owner's carelessness and theatricality. Bianca stared at the necklace in her friend's hand, as if it were the ghost of her own social ruin. "Oh," she whispered. It must have fallen in." "No," Gabriel said, his voice like the closing of a vault door. "It didn't fall. You dropped it. And then you tried to ruin a woman's life to cover for your own panic and incompetence." He turned to Carl Benson, who looked as if he was about to have a heart attack. "Mr. Benson, my wife will not be returning to her position here. Her final paycheck, along with a significant severance for the emotional distress and public humiliation she has endured, will be sent to my office by the end of the day. Is that understood?" "Yes, of course, Mr. Shaw. Absolutely," Carl babbled. "Good." Gabriel turned back to Bianca, who now looked small and utterly broken. "As for you, Mrs. Serrano, my wife is a private citizen. You have assaulted her. You have slandered her. I believe that is a matter for the police, after all." "No, please," Bianca cried, the last vestiges of her pride crumbling. "Please don't. My husband, Marcus, Your husband is a man who builds towers of glass and steel on foundations of debt," Gabriel said, his voice low and lethal. "A man like that should know better than anyone how quickly a poorly constructed edifice can collapse when its structural integrity is compromised." He looked around the silent watching room, his gaze sweeping over the faces of Boston's elite. "I trust you all enjoyed your lunch." He put his arm around Miranda's shoulders, pulling her close. "Let's go home, Mira," he whispered, and he guided her out of the restaurant, leaving behind the wreckage of Bianca Serrano's reputation and the profound, ringing silence of his power. The silence in the car was a heavy blanket, woven from the scent of old leather, Gabriel's tweed jacket, and the lingering, sour smell of Chardonnay that clung to Miranda's clothes. It was Gabriel's car, an unassuming but immaculately maintained vintage Volvo station wagon, an anomaly in their world of black sedans and sleek sports cars. It was a rolling testament to his quiet disdain for ostentation. Miranda stared out the window, watching the stately brownstones of the back bay slide by in a blur of brick and autumn leaves. She felt hollowed out, a building gutted by fire, the facade still standing, but the interior a ruin of smoking embers. The triumph she should have felt was absent, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a disquieting sense of dislocation. Gabriel drove, his hands resting lightly on the wheel. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the restaurant, his profile etched with a controlled anger that felt more dangerous than any outburst. He wasn't a man who raged. He was a man who calculated, who methodically dismantled. Finally, as they crossed the Charles River, the Boston skyline glittering in the afternoon sun, he spoke, his voice quiet. "I'm taking you home." "I know," she said, her own voice a stranger's. "I don't mean the apartment in the South End," he clarified gently. "I mean home, to Beacon Hill." A knot of resistance tightened in her chest. The grand, historic house she had grown up in, the house that now belonged to him and, by extension, to them, was the very symbol of the life she had tried to build an existence apart from. "Gabe, no. I have my own place." "Your own place is where you'll go to pack a bag," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're not sleeping there alone tonight. You're not going back to that restaurant. This experiment of yours, Miranda. It's over." The words, meant to be protective, landed like a judgment. "It's not an experiment," she shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. "It's my life, my work. I was paying my own way through my degree, and I have always been proud of you for that," he said, his voice softening, but with an edge of frustration. "I have respected your need to do this. I have bitten my tongue every time you came home exhausted, with sore feet and aching shoulders. But this is different. That woman put her hands on you. She humiliated you. And for what? So you could feel independent for a few more months before you graduate? It's not about feeling independent, Gabe. It's about being it. It's about knowing that I can stand on my own 2 feet, that my life is built on a foundation that I laid myself. You, of all people, should understand that. You walked away from your family's investment bank to build your foundation, to do something that was yours." "That's different," he said, his voice taut, his knuckles a stark white against the dark leather of the steering wheel. "I was fighting against a corrupt and hollow legacy. You were fighting against a safety net. My safety net. I have never understood why my love, my desire to protect you, has always felt like a cage." The raw, wounded honesty of the question silenced her. It was a question that had hung in the air between them for years, a ghost in their beautiful, quiet life. They pulled into the private cobblestone alley behind their Beacon Hill home, the engine cutting out with a soft sigh, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. In the dim light of the garage, she looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw past the quiet fury to the deep, tectonic fear beneath. His anger wasn't at her. It was at the world for hurting her, and at himself for being unable to stop it. He was a man who could rewrite the code of global finance, who could redirect the flow of capital to eradicate diseases. But he had been utterly powerless against the casual cruelty of a socialite with a $200 glass of wine, and that helplessness had terrified him. The days that followed were a study in dislocation. Miranda moved through the grand, silent rooms of the Beacon Hill house, not as its mistress, but as a convalescent, a refugee from a life that no longer existed. The house, which she had once known as home, now felt like a gilded cage, its soaring ceilings and Palladian windows serving only to emphasize her confinement. Elena, their housekeeper, moved around her with a hushed, reverent sympathy, handling Miranda's wine-stained uniform as if it were a holy relic. When it was returned from the city's most exclusive dry cleaner, it was folded in a box lined with pristine tissue paper, the stain exorcised, the fabric impossibly white. Miranda placed the box in the back of her closet, unable to look at it, unable to throw it away. It was the last artifact of an archaeological dig into her own identity. She tried to work on her thesis, but the precise architectural drawings, the calm analysis of stress loads and material decay, felt like a language from another world. The theories of structural integrity seemed pathetically inadequate to explain the sudden, catastrophic collapse of her own. She would find herself staring out at the manicured garden, her heart pounding, replaying the moment the wine struck her chest, the cold shock, the collective gasp, the hot shame that felt like a physical acid. Sleep offered no escape, filled with fractured dreams of falling, of whispering crowds, of Bianca Serrano's face contorting in a mask of triumphant hatred. News of the Serranos' unraveling arrived not as a single, thunderous crash, but as a series of quiet, inexorable reports, like the groaning of a building settling into its own ruin. Gabriel never spoke of it, and she never asked. There were no headlines screaming of revenge. Gabriel's power was geological, not meteorological. It operated in deep, unseen shifts that caused earthquakes miles away. A brief mention in the Globe's business section noted that Marcus Serrano's flagship downtown project had been abruptly scuttled when its primary backer, a Swiss private equity firm with deep ties to the Shaw Foundation's endowment, had quietly withdrawn its capital, citing unforeseen fiduciary concerns. Then, a Society columnist wrote a cattily sympathetic piece about Bianca Serrano's sudden resignation from all her charity boards, hinting at a dramatic reversal of fortune. The final definitive tremor was a notice of a foreclosure auction for their ostentatious waterfront mansion. Gabriel had not destroyed them with a frontal assault. He had simply made a few quiet, strategic phone calls to people who valued their relationship with him, presenting them with the unassailable truth of Marcus Serrano's over-leveraged, fundamentally unsound business. He had, in his own parlance, conducted a stress test, and the entire edifice had crumbled to dust. One rain-slicked Tuesday afternoon, Miranda saw her. She was leaving a drab law office in the financial district, huddled under a cheap black umbrella that was no match for the driving wind. Bianca looked diminished, her expensive clothes hanging on a frame that had lost its arrogant posture. The fire was gone from her eyes, replaced by a damp, exhausted bitterness. She was no longer a monster. She was just a woman, stripped of her armor, left shivering in the ruins. Miranda felt a ghost of a sensation, not pity, not triumph, but a profound and unsettling emptiness. The demolition was complete, and it had all been done in her name. The thought was a cold stone in her stomach. Was this her power now? A borrowed, destructive force, a weapon she could summon with a single tearful phone call. That night, the storm that had been gathering inside her finally broke. She found Gabriel in his study, the room a sanctuary of warm mahogany and the scent of old paper. He was on a video call, discussing the logistics of deploying a new water purification technology in a sub-Saharan village. His voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a man bringing order to a chaotic world. She waited until the call ended, her arms crossed tight against her chest. The silence he turned to face her with was expectant, patient. "They're ruined," she said. The words were flat, devoid of accusation, but heavy with consequence. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. An unstable structure was exposed to a predictable force. It failed. That is the order of things. The order of things? Her voice rose, sharp and brittle. "Gabe, that isn't order. That's a demolition. You used a cannon to kill a mosquito. You wielded your power with the same casual, overwhelming force that she did. You didn't prove her worldview was wrong. You just proved that your version of it was bigger, stronger, and more effective. You became a more efficient monster to destroy a lesser one." A flicker of something, surprise, hurt, crossed his face. "She assaulted you, Miranda. She publicly humiliated you and was moments away from having you arrested on a felony charge. What did you want me to do? Send her a strongly worded letter to the editor? I acted to ensure that she, and anyone else who might ever consider it, would understand that there are consequences." "But don't you see the irony?" she cried, pacing the length of the Persian rug, her footsteps muffled, her voice ringing against the silent, leather-bound books that lined the walls. Her husband's entire career was built on demolishing things, beautiful, historic buildings with flaws, with histories, to make way for his soulless glass boxes. And to punish him, you did the exact same thing to their lives. You saw a flaw and you brought the whole thing down. You didn't preserve, you didn't reinforce, you didn't even try to fix it. You just erased it. Their lives were a facade, he countered, his own voice rising, the cool control finally cracking, built on debt and cruelty and the delusion that money made them gods. There was nothing there worth preserving. That wasn't your decision to make, she shot back, whirling to face him. And that is the entire problem, Gabe. My work, the reason I took that job, the reason I have spent 3 years of my life studying the past, is because I believe things are worth preserving, even when they are flawed. Especially when they are flawed. You find the load-bearing walls, you shore up the foundation, you repair the cracks. You don't just light a match and walk away because it's easier. This is not about a building, he thundered, standing now, his height filling the room. This is about my wife. The world you want to live in, Miranda. A gentle, academic world where people are reasonable and dignity is its own shield, is a beautiful fiction. I live in the world that is. And in that world, the only thing that protects you from a predator is a bigger predator. I will be that for you, whether you like it or not. The words hung in the air between them, raw and terrible. And in that moment, she understood the fundamental crack in their own foundation. No, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a sudden, chilling clarity. That's not protection, Gabe. That's erasure. Not just of the Serranos. Of me. He stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? For 3 years I built a life. A small, difficult, exhausting life. It was mine. I was Miranda, the waitress who was good at her job, the student who was at the top of her class. I had an identity that I had laid, brick by brick. And with one phone call, you demolished it. You didn't save me, Gabe. You replaced me. You replaced my identity with yours. In that restaurant, I ceased to be a person and became a possession. Gabriel Shaw's wife. My name became a weapon that I didn't ask for, and you fired on my behalf. The woman I was trying to become ceased to exist, and I was put back in the beautiful, safe, suffocating box of being your wife. He was silent, the force of her words hitting him with a visible impact. He sank back into his chair, his face pale. She walked to the window, looking out at the rain-streaked lights of the city. The great tragedy of Bianca Serrano, she said softly, is not that she was cruel, but that she had no identity of her own. She was just Marcus Serrano's wife. Her power, her clothes, her necklace, it was all borrowed from him. She was a hollow facade, and when he collapsed, she vanished. And that is my greatest fear. That's what I was fighting against. She turned back to him, her eyes pleading. Don't you see? You didn't save me from her. You showed me that I was just like her, in the end, utterly dependent on the power of the man I married. The silence that followed was longer this time, filled not with anger, but with the slow, painful dawning of understanding. Gabriel looked around his study, at the artifacts of his life, his power, his intellect, as if seeing them for the first time through her eyes. He saw the fortress he had built, and he finally saw the person he had locked inside. Days passed. A fragile truce settled over the house. They moved around each other with a careful, aching tenderness, like engineers inspecting a structure after an earthquake, afraid of what new cracks they might find. One evening, he came to her as she sat in the library, the box containing her uniform open on the table before her. She was tracing the simple, embroidered script of her name tag. Miranda. He didn't speak for a long time. He simply stood beside her, looking at the uniform. "I see it now," he said finally, his voice raspy with emotion. "I saw it as a disguise, a costume for your experiment. But it wasn't. It was the uniform of a citizen of a country I've never been to, and I deported you." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate. It was the apology she hadn't known she needed, not for destroying the Serranos, but for failing to see what he had destroyed in her. "I was so afraid," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Hearing you on that phone, so broken. I have never felt so helpless, and my only response to that feeling is control. To build a wall so high, the world can never touch you again. I didn't realize I was building a prison." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing with his. "It's not a prison if you give me the key." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "What does the key look like?" And there, in the quiet of the library, with the ghost of her other life lying between them, they began to rebuild. It was not a proposal she made, but a blueprint they designed together. "Your greatest strength is your vision," she began, her voice gaining the steady, analytical calm of her profession. "You see the world on a macro scale, systems, finances, logistics. But you're blind, Gabe. You're blind to the human element. You assess the structural integrity of a company's balance sheet, but you have no way of assessing the structural integrity of its CEO's character. The rot in Marcus Serrano's soul was invisible to your due diligence until it was smeared all over your wife's blouse." He nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. "My work is quantitative. Character is qualitative. So let me be your qualitative analyst," she said, her voice electric with a purpose that was finally her own, forged in the fire of her humiliation and cooled by the clarity of her insight. "Don't give me a title. Don't give me an office. Let me be your partner. When the Shaw Foundation considers a major investment in a person, a company, a project, let me be the one who goes to the ground. I won't look at the spreadsheets. I'll look at the people. I'll do what I've always done. I'll observe. I'll find the hairline cracks in their stories, the dry rot in their reputations, the foundational weaknesses they hide behind a gleaming facade. I won't be your shield, Gabe. I will be your eyes." A slow smile spread across Gabriel's face, a smile of profound relief and dawning admiration. He wasn't looking at a victim. He was looking at his equal, a woman who had taken the trauma inflicted upon her and reforged it not into a weapon of demolition, but into a precision instrument of preservation. He had tried to protect her from the world, and in response, she was offering to show him how to truly see it. "A new foundation," he murmured, squeezing her hand. "For us." 6 months later, they stood together on a windswept bluff overlooking a struggling fishing town in coastal Maine. The Shaw Foundation was considering a multi-million-dollar proposal from a slick development firm that wanted to build a luxury resort, promising jobs and economic revival. On paper, it was perfect. Gabriel was studying the economic projections on his tablet, his brow furrowed. Miranda was looking at the town. For the past week, she had been living there, not in a hotel, but in a small rented room above the local diner. She had drunk coffee with fishermen at dawn, listened to the gossip at the post office, and spent hours in the town library, reading through decades of local council meeting minutes. "The numbers work," Gabriel said, finally looking up. "The ROI is solid." "The numbers are a lie," Miranda said quietly. She pointed down toward the small, weathered harbor. "That developer has a history, 3 towns over, of breaking his promise to hire local labor. He brings in his own crews. The jobs he's promising are seasonal, minimum wage service positions. And I found a geological survey from the 70s that his proposal conveniently omitted, one that shows this entire bluff is prone to erosion. He plans to build, take the profits, and be gone in 10 years when the whole thing starts to slide into the sea. She then pointed to a small, unassuming woman mending nets on the dock, her face weathered by salt and sun. That's Sarah Jenkins. Her family has been fishing here for 5 generations. She's leading a local co-op that wants to get a grant to build a sustainable fish processing plant. It's a smaller project, less glamorous. The ROI is slower, but it's built on the bedrock of this community. Her foundation is sound. Gabriel lowered his tablet. He wasn't looking at the numbers anymore. He was looking at the town, at the woman on the dock, through his wife's eyes. He was seeing the cracks and the bedrock, the facade and the foundation. He put his arm around her, pulling her close against the cold Atlantic wind. "What do you recommend we do, Mrs. Shaw?" he asked, and there was a new meaning in the name now. Not a title of possession, but a recognition of partnership. Miranda leaned her head against his shoulder, looking out at the horizon. She was no longer a waitress in disguise, nor was she just the protected wife of a powerful man. She was the architect of their shared future. She had integrated the two halves of herself, forging a new identity, built not on independence or dependence, but on the profound, reinforcing strength of interdependence. "I recommend," she said, a thrill of quiet, purposeful joy in her voice, "that we invest in what's built to last."